Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caio Melo. I'm a PhD student in Digital Humanities and today's chair. Welcome to the seminar series of the School of Advanced Studies Digital Humanities Research Hub. Today we're going to watch Dr. Gabriel Bodard's presentation entitled Teaching Digital Approach to Cultural Heritage as an International Collaboration. Gabby's reader in Digital Classics at SAS. The presentation will last 40 minutes and we will have 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. So feel free to send your questions through the chat and they will be moderated by my colleague Rihanna Lewis. Please be aware that this session is being recorded. I'd remind everyone to keep their microphones off during the talk. Yeah, that's it. So I'll hand over to Gabby.
Cool. Thank you very much, Caio. I'll share my screen now then. Great, is that working? Yeah. So this in this seminar I'm going to talk about a particular program teaching digital approaches to cultural heritage, but not specifically to talk about that that particular module, but to talk about the collaborative means of both designing and teaching that program, and I'll talk more about that as we go on. Those of you who are live in this call have almost certainly seen the abstract where the call was advertised, so I won't go through this here. I just put this up here for people who find the YouTube video without the context, so they can pause and read that if they want to. A bit of context then first, the background. The module that I'm talking about is one of two modules that I teach in Digital Classics. And the reason I bring this up is that this module is not taught in the context of a digital humanities program. The vast majority of the students who follow this program are doing a master's degree in a classical subject, classics, ancient history, Greek and Latin, classical art and archaeology, or classical reception. So it's taught primarily to classic students from around London, from several different colleges in London. It's one of these two modules, as I say, Digital Classics, which is more literature focused and text and language focused, and then the digital approaches to cultural heritage. And it can be taken by students in SAS doing masters here, full credit, or more commonly for audit, and it is also occasionally followed by research students and indeed postdocs who sort of take it more as a sort of foundational sort of research training rather than a credit program. The other bit of background I want to give on this is a very heavy part of the way this course is taught is through the Sunoikisis Digital Classics program. This is a program that's been running for about 6 or 7 years, founded by Monica Berti, centered at the University of Leipzig, now co-organized with Monica by me and a few others, and taught by people worldwide. There are faculty from 50 or more institutions on, I think, all 6 populated continents. I'll show you a map in a second. The content is delivered via YouTube, and the supporting materials are on GitHub. And it's an asynchronous program. It's very often used in the manner of a flipped seminar. So the YouTube pages contain reading lists, resources, and exercises. Students will watch the videos, and then in one way or another, this will be followed up by some other teaching practice. It's used in lots of different ways by people all over the world, and even broader group of people than the 100 or more people who've been involved in teaching it in the last few years. And various different teaching models that are behind how this works. And I'll talk a little bit about the way I use the Synoquisis classes in my teaching, as that puts that into context. But other people use very different models. I just wanted to make that part clear. This is the footprint of people who have taught on Synoquisis Digital Classics. It's been used, as I say, by many more people in other parts of the world. But as you can see, this is a more or less global footprint, although some continents are only represented by one institution, but nevertheless it's a fairly impressively large group. The context of this module, as I say, there are several modules within the Synoquisis Digital Classics program. It's run over 3 semesters in the year. But the one that I'm talking about, the one that I use in support of my class on digital approaches to cultural heritage, is this one that is slightly more material culture focused. So a bit of background on that. I've been looking for various different ways to teach this topic for quite a few years. And part of the issue is that as we're talking about digital humanities approaches to classics, it's fairly easy to see what you need to say in that classics aren't already hearing elsewhere. For digital approaches to archaeology, it's slightly more complex, because archaeology and archaeologists have adopted all sorts of methods natively as part of the sorry, I think my microphone's just stopped working, but I hope you can still hear me. Natively,
we can hear you.
Great, thank you. As part of archaeological practice, so people talk a lot less about digital archaeology than they do about digital other methods. As 2011, I was teaching a module called Communication and Consumption of Cultural Heritage at King's in the Digital Humanities department, which was just trying to avoid using the title Digital Archaeology. And so we were looking at both digital humanities methods as applied to material culture and antiquity, and also geoarchaeological methods applied to history and text more generally. This course was co-designed by Stuart Dunn and Charlotte Tupman, I should say, who were my colleagues in King's at the time. So this is a bit of background. We had some of the same questions as to who is our target audience in this, because a lot of archaeologists already do things like GIS and database design and 3D imaging and so forth, and they think of it as archaeology, not as digital humanities. So this then migrated when I migrated to down the road to the University of London, to a module that I've started teaching and I now teach there, called Digital Approaches to Cultural Heritage. The core content of this module is threefold. There's a strands on geographical technologies, on imaging, both 2D and 3D methods, and also on more sort of loosely termed intellectual property and legal and ethical questions around digital humanities, and particularly around digital cultural heritage. Various other topics, as also listed on this slide, are occasionally visited in this with particular sessions or combined sessions, but the 3 core strands are those I mentioned at the top. So just to quickly look at the excuse me, the program for this year's semester, which just ran last term, you can see that you can pick out from that several 3D sessions, several geographical sessions, and a few that are clearly legal and ethical questions. But you can also see that it's not just as simple as having 3 sessions on each, right? That there's sessions, the topics are woven among each other, and there are various things that that address and enhance one another in that program. And I'll come back to this program in a bit more detail shortly. I want to talk about, so that's the design of the program. All that content is delivered through the Sunoikisis Digital Classics program. The program that I just showed there, that's the program of the Synoquisis Digital Classics Cultural Heritage semester. How that works at the University of London is that one of the modules offered by the Institute of Classical Studies, ICSO 3, is called Digital Approaches to Cultural Heritage, and is taught with 2 hours in a classroom per week in normal years. That's done via Zoom this year, for obvious reasons. And what we do is I consider the Synoquisis session of the previous week, the Synoquisis sessions are on the Thursday afternoons, the Synoquisis session of the previous week to have been the lecture, as it were, or if you prefer, it's a required reading. And the exercise is then something that the students have to attempt between the Thursday session when it's introduced and the Tuesday following week, Tuesday morning, when we have the in-person session. And we then discuss some of the readings. We discuss the practical work that they've attempted. This is usually an exercise involving learning a new technology or trying out an online tool or a digital tool of some kind. And then, we discuss both difficulties with using it, any technical issues that might have come up, but more importantly, implications, research value, shortcomings, usability, and other features of the technology, of the tool, of the method that are being discussed. And we try to pull out the differences between those three things: the technology in general, the specific tool that they've tried, and the methods that underlie and sit behind the technologies and tools that we're talking about. Worth just saying very briefly a few words about the assessment for this program. I've never thought it very useful to ask students to just write a 5,000-word essay about digital humanities. So we very much ask them to do a practical project, but they then write a report on that project. So they build a resource of some kind, or they experiment with a tool or a method that they've been taught, or a method that's related to what we've done in the course but that wasn't actually taught. What they really try to do with this is they come up with their own research question from classics, from history, and they ask themselves, how is this method, or how is this tool or technology going to help me answer my questions, my research questions in this classics question? And the assessment is roughly half and half: the credit for the design and implementation of the project and for the written report, which is half the length of a normal essay, and includes sort of the content a bit like an essay. So they talk about the background, the research background, some of the literature that they've cited, and they have conclusions and so forth, but also something like a science report, because they want to talk a bit about their methodology, their hypothesis, what they were hoping to prove or to disprove, and then the results and how well that worked out. And because this is very much an experiment, and they're able to take risks, it's always made very clear to them that if you get a negative result, you say, I want to see if this method helps me to answer this question, and the answer turns out to be no, this method gave me no help whatsoever in answering this question, that can still be an absolutely brilliant project with an excellent final grade, because what they've done is nevertheless carried out an experiment. It's more about how this experiment was designed than whether they ended up choosing something that worked. This has been something that people have sometimes worried about in the past, but I find that if this is really explained up front, students have been very willing to take risks and to be quite happy to write up what might be considered to be failed projects. So that's the context of how I've taught this in a combination between the classroom or Zoom and an online forum in this year, and the Synoquisis online sessions that are the asynchronous delivery of this content. So onto the collaboration. This is very much not something that I've designed on my own. the Sunoikisis cultural heritage session has been co-organized by several different people over the years, and all of these people have brought things to this. In fact, in detail, Tom Elliott, who may be known to you as the director of the Pleiades project at New York University, and Rada Varga, who's a lecturer in ancient history and digital humanities at the University of Cluj-Napoca in Romania, brought various expertise to this that really supplemented what I was able to bring to the course as early as 2017, including geographical topics, GIS, prosopography, database, networks, visualization, all these sorts of things that they between them brought expertise in that really enriched this. In 2018 and 2019, not only was the Synoquisis Cultural Heritage Session co-chaired by my colleague Valeria Vitale, who incidentally was a student in the very first communication and whatever it was of cultural heritage course that I taught at King's back in 2012. But she also ran the module for the ICS in those 2 years as well. And she, obviously, for those of you who know her, brought expertise in 3D modeling, also linked open data, linked open geographical data in particular, from her work with the Pelagios network, and also helped to really bring in several new voices into the discussions of ethics and other legal issues in the module. So that really transformed the module in a way that can't be overstated. This last year, the module was co-organized by Alicia Walsh, who's a freelance archaeologist at Recollection Heritage in the Netherlands, and Andrea Wallace, who's a lecturer in heritage law at Exeter, and they brought various expertise to this, including various different 3D methods and approaches and contacts in that area, and also a lot of discussion around heritage law, intangible cultural heritage, restitution, and so forth, and also a much wider range than just classics. So much of the content was from a far wider field, both geographically and chronologically, than ancient Greece and Rome and the Greco-Roman Mediterranean. And then this year, it's being co-designed with the help of Paolo Granados at the British Museum, who was also, incidentally, a student of the first MA module I taught at the Institute of Classical Studies back in 2015, who also brings expertise in linked open data and her current work on anthropology and world heritage. So she works at the Institute of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. So lots of new material and new perspectives being added to the program there by all of these people, and all of these people continue to be involved in one way or another in the program as well. So back to the example of this year's program, you can see the detail there. There's a mix of fairly practical sessions, like 3D imaging and mapping, and 3D imaging, scanning, and community mapping. These are sessions with very hands-on content, talking about the technologies, talking about the methods that students can learn and can adopt and adapt for themselves. But also in all cases talking about the issues, the implications, the value, the shortcomings, and so forth of these. For example, the session on publishing 3D models, where we talked a bit about 3D printing, we talked about the Sketchfab for publishing 3D models online, we talked about 3D formats, was also a question about intellectual property. When you publish 3D models, who owns the intellectual property on the 3D models that you publish? Is it the person who made them? Is it the person whose heritage was being modeled or imaged in the first place? Some combination of the two. Nobody? Are they world property, etc.? So really complex questions, and this is impacted on by discussions of the intellectual property on 3D models in industry and science, as well as in heritage. So experts on those matters joined in those conversations. And then there was conversations in several of the other sessions co-organized by Andrea about intangible cultural heritage, indigenous heritage, heritage restitution, all these questions of how do 3D technologies contribute to conversations about and issues around and the practicalities of restitution and repatriation of heritage. Issues like, it's not just as simple as, let's say this is public domain, when the 3D heritage belonged to somebody before it was stolen by the museum who so generously made it available under an open license, right? So it's there's really complex issues in there, and even if the legal case is clear, which I think it isn't always, the ethical case isn't necessarily. So all sorts of interesting things come there. Likewise, the geographical topics intersect with some of these cultural topics. Issues of community mapping and web mapping both really impact on whose data is being mapped, whose landscape is being mapped, and what is being done with it and what is it being used for. And also with images, intersection of 3D technologies and geographical landscape technologies have interesting features in there. So the what started out as 3 strands and could almost have been 3 mini modules really became inseparable and a really sort of excellent blend of things. And every single person whose name is on this page and no doubt many others has had an impact on designing this entire program and has made this really possible to get right. So my main point really is, and this is in some ways my final point, is that it's collaboration and that blend of expertise, but also that conversation with all sorts of different people that has made this entire program possible in the way that it is. And I think it's a really strong program now. Certainly stronger than if I'd taught it on my own. I was going to make this point by putting up that list in one of the earlier slides of all the topics that we sometimes cover or that we generally cover and focus on in this digital approaches to cultural heritage module, and then highlighting on that slide those topics that are not my primary research expertise. But it soon became obvious that I might as well just have turned the entire slide red, and it would have had the impact more of embarrassing me and making it look like I didn't know what I was doing, rather than making my point about collaboration and the need for multiple perspectives. We all, I think, who are involved in teaching at universities, we will teach in areas of our own expertise, hopefully, but also we teach in other areas that we know enough about to teach, but it's not something we publish on or that we necessarily be comfortable publishing on. There are all sorts of things that need to be covered at a relatively beginner's level. So I'm not wouldn't be particularly embarrassed about it from that perspective. But in any case, the more people who have an impact on the design of a program, on the implementation and the delivery of the program, the better, I think, in this sort of case. Especially if you can find a way to make it really a coherent and comprehensive program tied together by themes and threads, and by having a single, in the Synoquisis session, there's many people presenting it. In the classroom, it's just me and the students. So there is a common thread through it for them. It's not as the oft criticized circus model, right, where each session is taught by a different person, and the person who's convening it doesn't necessarily even turn up. It's very much as a coherent model, but the various perspectives brought to it really do enrich that. In particular, having multiple perspectives in designing that program has made it possible for us to talk about diversity, and also to implement diversity, not only in the sense of having several different people involved, but in the sense of representing the people whose heritage is being discussed, the people who are stakeholders, and various voices that are otherwise too easy to overlook, not only because of the various demographic groups they're in, but also because many of the people who've contributed to this program are museum professionals, or are professional archaeologists, or who work in other parts of the heritage industry or other industries, and contribute to this from that perspective rather than as academics. So there's a much wider range of people who bring particular expertise and particular viewpoints. We can have our opinions on and our arguments about various cultural heritage and intellectual property questions, but if you work in the legal department of a museum, you have a different perspective on that than I do, working in a university, who might have different questions and so forth. We've been able to cover a much wider range of world heritage. I can't claim to be an expert in any aspect of world heritage other than the Greco-Roman Mediterranean, but with more people's input, we've been able to cover, as I say, pretty much every continent on the planet, in some aspect of discussion of heritage, and discussion of technologies used to address heritage. And a lot of these ethical questions as well, it really helps to have both the legal expertise and the ethical training and discussion background in discussing these sorts of questions, to really think about not only, wouldn't it be nice if, but going much deeper into the question about how these ethical conversations are couched, what the state of play is, how this impacts on things like international treaties, on law, on intellectual property law, heritage law, art law, and various other things, globally as well as locally, and so forth. So all of that sort of content is, couldn't even have been covered, much less covered authoritatively and comprehensively with a single designer and lecturer for a program like this. And I sort of wanted to end by saying that I've been impressed by how much the students who take this course over the last 5 or 6 years have been willing to adopt the full range of topics for their potential assessments. It would be easy to imagine that the majority of students would pick something that looks like a nice, easy topic that didn't challenge them too much and do their assessment on that. That hasn't been the case. It's very much been clear that students were willing to take on things which I would have thought were difficult tasks, including tasks that they had to go out and learn a bit more of a programming language than we'd been willing to teach them in order to do. So we've had students go off and learn some Python in their own time in order to be able to do their exercise, or learn some XQuery and so forth. We've had students who've been really quite creative in their mixing of methods, including both methods that we've taught and methods that we haven't. Methods that have maybe been mentioned in passing. We've taught one particular approach to GIS, but said if your interest was in X, then these other methods might be interesting. So they've gone off and learned those other methods, finding YouTube videos or online tutorials or whatever, in order to implement those. Who've really, picked up one or another 3D modeling tool, including ones that we haven't gone into and taught in this semester, in order to be able to do something with the model that they've done. They've done all sorts of background research in addition to the technical implementation of the project. And as I say, really being quite creative in how they mix these technologies, how they select the topics, and how they apply these methods to their own research interests. It's also been impressive how many have brought their own research interests along. I often say to them, if you're doing a dissertation or you're planning a dissertation later in the year on a topic, and you can think of some way that you could digitally process some of the data that will feed into your dissertation, that would be fantastic. Kill two birds with one stone. Let's not waste any time here. And people have come with really interesting questions that they therefore already have a certain amount of expertise on, and they can really ask these questions with an informed opinion of how useful these methods actually are in answering them. But also sometimes applying them to completely new areas. People, talking about the landscape of a part of the world that they're interested in, or that they don't necessarily know much about, that's not anything to do with their research, or finding a building that they've always been interested in, but it's not something they're working on, or something like this 3D model, or being willing to learn about and contribute to new communities. These, we often talk about crowdsourcing projects and other, not only crowdsourcing, but other kinds of community contributed projects and research. And the number of students who are very keen for their project to be useful and valuable, as well as interesting to themselves, is also quite impressive. It's also been very impressive how many are just willing to take risks. They come to me. Because this is such an open question for their assessment. I don't just say go off and do your project. They have to talk to me, and they have to tell me what their project is going to be, and they have to really discuss it with me quite a lot before they start working on it. And I reinforce and reassure them about the issue that a negative result doesn't mean a bad assessment. But the number of people who really at the beginning of their assessment, they don't know whether it's going to work or not, and that doesn't worry them. They're willing to take these risks. They're willing to try learning new technologies. They're also aware that this is a very small project. So the thing that makes this project fail, as it were, the thing that makes this project not deliver as valuable a result to their research question as they might have hoped, can be simply that they ran out of time. They bit off more than they could chew. They started trying to learn a new technology, and it was difficult. Or there wasn't enough support. It's not something that you could do in the time you would normally take to write a master's level essay, bearing in mind that they probably have 3 or 4 to write it in each semester. It's been something, they've been really willing to take these risks, and they've not been intimidated by the scale and size and difficulty of some of the questions. And I've actually found, and I'm sure, second markers and internal examiners have confirmed this. So it's not just my bias towards people willing to take risks, but people who were willing to take risks, who did try something that was very difficult, also tended to get very good marks for them. And there could be various reasons for that, but it could be people who were likely to do well were the ones willing to take risks. But I also think that that it's been the challenge of writing up a negative result has also been something which stretches them, and I think this has been something that's been very valuable for students, and has for me that's really that supports my own impression that this is quite a strong and successful program now, that the number of people who've contributed to it have made this so broad and so wide, and that's really made it possible for students to take these sorts of chances. I wish I could give concrete examples at this point. I would, in an ideal world, I'd follow this up with a final slide or a set of slides with concrete examples of most recent students' work. But obviously, I can't share students' assessments with you on this. And in fact, the most recent bunch of students will only be getting their grades next week, so I couldn't even ask their permission, from the best few to show their assessments on this presentation. But take my word for it, there's some really exciting stuff being done by students willing to take risks and willing to do willing to try things out, even if they're things that we haven't actually taught them, but just from the discussions they've been having and the introduction to the methods that they've had, and from not being scared of learning new technologies, as they've had to do so every week for the last 10 weeks. So they realize it's not impossible. I just end by pointing again to the Synoquisis Digital Classics program. There are 3 modules of Synoquisis DC every year. Normally, digital classics, which is slightly more Greek and Latin focused, but is certainly more language and literature focused. In the fall semester, the Synoquisis Digital Cultural Heritage, which we've been talking about in the spring semester, and then a slightly longer and slightly more diverse Synoquisis Digital Classics program that is led by Monica Berti in the summer semester, which starts, I think, around the end of April and runs until early July. So that semester is midway through as we speak, and there'll be a session on digital prosopography this afternoon. But the reason I wanted to highlight this is that Synoquisis Digital Classics, as much as the Digital Cultural Heritage session that I've been talking about, really thrives as a result of massive collaboration. Not just a few people getting involved, not just the 15 or so people whose names appear on any one semester's program, but the dozens and hundreds of people who get involved as instructors, as presenters, as collaborators, as designers, as people who use the module with their own students and then give us feedback, as all the students who follow it, people who turn up to the sessions, people who watch on YouTube and ask questions on YouTube. Any kind of contribution to this is really valuable and does make it stronger. And we've had people just let us know that they're using it. I'm currently using this with a class of 10 students, for example. That's really useful information to know, especially if you tell us where those students are, whether or not English is their first language, what their backgrounds are. That can help us feed into how we design this. So this is just an appeal. If you can think of any reason why you or any of your colleagues might use this program, I'd really love to hear from you. My email address is on there. Monica Berti would also love to hear from you. We'd be very, very happy to collaborate in almost any way imaginable in future sessions. So yes, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Gabby. It's always nice to hear more about teaching experiences and the challenges involved in this sort of activities. I think it's very interesting. So if you have any questions, please just write them on chat, and we're gonna read and bring to Gabby. But I would like to start by asking you the first question about your experience in combining theoretical and technical, practical teaching in these modules. So regarding programming, the use of softwares. So how was your planning to combine these in the module for the best understanding of the students?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I've tended to sort of let things go as they come. So on the one hand, we have nine Synoquisis sessions and 10 seminars, and some of them are more theoretical, and some of them are more practical, some of them more technical, and that's one way in which we try to get a good mix of that sort of thing. I try to have some sort of technical concrete exercise every week, but some weeks it's so theoretical that the technical exercise is really go and look at this website to get some examples and then discuss, rather than learning a new technical skill. But I also in my teaching I make sure that every week the students have some required reading, which is usually on theoretical questions, as well as a required practical exercise. And both of those things are discussed the following week in quite some detail. And both of those are compulsory activities. So so that's sort of that helps to sort of blend the two, but it's almost impossible not to blend the two. I think as soon as we've talked about some theoretical and ethical and implication issues and cultural issues around the methods, then as soon as they're starting to use the technology, they're starting to think about those issues as well, and vice versa. It really comes into that discussion. I could not plan to discuss the technical issues at all, but given that they've read a paper about it and it will have been talked about it in the YouTube video, they will bring it up. They're much more interested in or they're at least as interested, let's say, in discussing the social issues around a particular practice, the research implications of a particular practice, as they are in which particular QGIS plugin they should be using and how to get it to work. That's something they do care about because they want to make it work. But that discussion, it's the problem sort of answers itself is the short answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will hand over to Rhiannon to moderate the questions.
Yes. Hello, and thank you for that talk, Gabriel. It was really interesting. There's something come through on the chat just from James Cummings asking, do you get any resistance from students afraid of the digital aspects, or are they self-selecting in having chosen this module?
Yeah, I guess largely they are self-selecting. So there are, I forget the exact numbers, somewhere between 80 and 100 classic students in London at any one time, MA students between the 4 universities, and between 10 and 15 sign up for my module. So yes, they're self-selecting in that sense. There are some people who come with a bit of trepidation. They always come on the first day saying, I don't know anything, this might be too hard for me. And no one's ever at the end of the module said, well, I didn't know anything, so this was too hard for me. So they can be nervous, but I think it's, again, this is an optional module, and it's a module targeted at classicists, not at digital humanities students. So they do very much. They are reassured by that, and they understand that this is something that they can handle. It's also, to be a bit cynical perhaps, it's also reassuring to know that even if there is one really difficult topic in the middle of the semester, they can just not use that for their assessment, right? It's I mean, if we spend a week teaching them Python, which is not very long to be studying Python, and they don't get anywhere with it, they don't design a project that involves having to write some Python. So and that's also clear from the beginning that they're there to get an overview of everything. They dig as deep as they want into the things that they choose.
Thank you. We have another question come through from Paula Granados, who says, thank you. That was brilliant, really interesting to listen about the benefits of the collaborative approach. Her question is, what were some of the major challenges that you encountered in designing, teaching the seminars from this collaborative perspective?
Challenges specifically from the collaborative perspective, I guess, include the question of different agendas being brought. So it can sometimes be, as well as it being valuable, how many different agendas the various different organizers and presenters are bringing. There can sometimes be perhaps a perceived conflict between how I want to teach digital humanities to classicists and how someone else wants us to teach art law to law students, right? I mean, it can sometimes be a little bit complicated to come up with an exercise that both sets of students could usefully do, because one set of students are much more interested in discussing law and ethics, and the other set of students want to get their teeth into a piece of software. I'm sort of exaggerating in both directions, right? But that can be. I take the word challenge not to mean things that make it difficult, but things that make it interesting. That again that help us to come up with solutions to that can be useful to everybody, such as having 2 or 3 exercises that students can choose between for slightly different perspectives, such as having exercises that can be taken in different directions, depending on their interest and expertise, that are broad enough that they're a bit technical, but they're also a bit theoretical. So there's not, nobody gets completely dismayed by that. That's the main challenge that comes to mind. I'm sure as soon as we all hang up at the end, I'll think of others. But yeah.
We've got a few more questions as well. Karen Wade says, thank you, really fascinating talk. I was wondering if you had any tips on marking or assessing so many projects, given that there are so many different and unique or unusual types of project, and presumably many tutors conducting the assessment.
Thank you. Yeah, no, so the classes that I teach are fairly small. 10 to 15 students is a small number of students. It's also one of the only things that I teach at the moment. Most of my academic duties are in other areas other than student teaching. So actually, it's not a large number. I am the person who marks the entire cohort, and the variety is one of the things that makes it bearable to do that. I mean, it's marking is probably most people's one of the least favorite things for most people to do, but it's definitely my least favorite thing to do. But that variety really does make it interesting. The challenge, I guess, is to be fair in comparing something that's been very technical with something that's been a negative result, with something that's been very theoretical, and I have to spend more time looking at the marking criteria than I have done in the past. Marking an essay, it's relatively easy to know where you're going with, where you should put it on a scale, but really looking at the marking criteria has really been quite important for this. But it also helps me to sort of, in my head, I'm very clear that I don't give a mark out of 50 for the project and a mark out of 50 for the report and then combine them, but to sort of in my head think, I feel like this is a really good project, but a mediocre report. Can I still give it a distinction? I have to sort of then think, well, how brilliant a project is it? If it really is an 80% project and only a sort of 60% report, then yes, that is still a distinction. But if it's just a and so that sort of thinking does sometimes. I mean, maybe that's how you're supposed to mark. You're supposed to think about the math as you're doing it, but I've tended not to. The other thing that I found myself doing, which again is probably the right way to do it, and maybe I'll be doing it the wrong way before, is to write the student feedback and then give it a grade. That's really sort of been that's how. And maybe I shouldn't be admitting that, that at least in my head, I've done it the other way around when marking essays. Say, well, okay, that's a 65 and here's my feedback on it. But really writing the feedback does help you do that. So none of those are really particular tips, but just sort of my insight on how this has worked for me.
Thank you so much. And we've got a couple more questions. So there's one from Saskia. Could you envisage a module of this type aimed at undergraduate humanities students? And if so, would you change anything?
I think it would have to be changed quite a lot, partly because undergraduates are not necessarily so research focused, so they would need a bit more guidance on topics. Saying pick a topic that interests you and then try this. That can be quite a challenge for I mean, it's a bit of a challenge for anyone, but it's so I think that side of things would have to be redesigned. There'd have to be a lot less assumption of background knowledge. And assumption of willingness to take risks. I think depending on what year of undergraduate the students it's aimed at would be. But I think that's what I'd change really in terms of focus. In terms of content, again, maybe I would try to make it more a more obvious pathway from beginning to end of the semester, rather than quite so eclectic. But I'm sort of speaking out of my hat at the moment, as I haven't done any undergraduate teaching for a few years, as we only do postgrad teaching here at SAS. So that's my sort of initial thoughts. If that's not just a theoretical question out of interest, but you're actually wondering about, potentially using this sort of content or designing a course like this for your undergraduate students, I'd be very, very happy to have a more detailed conversation about this sometime. So please do get in touch. If it's just a general question of wondering out loud, then we can leave it there.
Perhaps Saskia could pop that in the chat. Yeah. I had a question as well from Hassan Rahmeh. Hope I said that properly. Great job, Gabby. Do you think that DH can become an end by itself, not a mere tool for teaching, visualizing, and illustrating content?
Yes, so I feel like there's two possible questions that could be being asked there, and maybe Hassan wants to come on and clarify which one he intends, or I could just try and answer both. But so one possible question is that you may be asking, if I understand correctly, is do we sometimes forget that humanities research is what we're here for, and sometimes DH is becomes an end in itself, and we forget the value of it. Or is the question sort of from the other perspective, can we sometimes, can we maybe transcend the idea that DH is just serving a discipline, it's just a teaching, visualization, and illustrating, but is actually a research discipline in its own right, that we that has its own agendas and aims and so forth. And maybe my answer to both questions would be the same, but if Hassan did want to clarify the question, he's welcome to.
Perhaps he can pop, the first one.
Okay, which is the first one? Okay, yeah. So I mean, I think DH is an end in itself, in as much as it is a discipline, and the research ends of DH are perfectly reasonable research goals. So I do a lot of work in TEI, and I think a lot of people see TEI as a tool. I see TEI as a research outcome. It's not for everybody, but so I think the same is true with a lot of these technologies. If your research goal is to improve a technology, or improve the documentation of a technology, or to make a technology more easily usable by others, that is itself, it is humanities research output. And I think that's one of the things that we're really trying to stress to students, is that this is digital research. It's not just, let's see how we can use these tools to do our classics research, which is the real, or archaeology research, which is the real research. The real academic work, and we could use computers to make nice illustrations for it. 3D modeling, for example, people it's very easy to imagine saying, well, let's make the nicest possible 3D model of this ancient building as an illustration for my article, or as a website to engage students, so they're more likely to sign up for our courses. And that is obviously one of the things people do with that, and those are both valuable things to do. But we can also ask research questions that cannot be answered without 3D modeling techniques. Testing out various architectural theories, hypotheses, trying, seeing whether things would fit in a particular geographical landscape, seeing how things, what view sheds are like in a particular area, and whether that contributes to our understanding of the place. Reconstituting the inside of a room whose murals and frescoes have all been stripped off and taken to various different museums. digitally, so we can then start to see, and people have looked at the way that figures painted on different walls make eye contact with each other, that we just can't tell that because one's in the Naples Museum and the other's now lost. These sorts of things. So the fact that we can do that we are doing actual research, and that the digital is a research discipline, is one of the things that yes, I think it is very important to show that these are ends in themselves as well as means, and neither weakens the other. We shouldn't say, oh well, you're only doing DH, therefore it's not real research, or you're only interested in the history, therefore you're not a real digital humanist. And neither of those is a useful position. So I think. And I think because, so as I've said, I only use these modules with classics students primarily, and archaeology students. But I know that some of the Synoquisis Digital Classics content is used in digital humanities programs. So they're coming at it from the other angle. Those are students who have understanding of and sympathy with the digital approaches already, but they didn't necessarily have that deep understanding of the particular classics research questions that we're introducing in these sessions. And I in different pedagogical backgrounds, that I think can also help to give them a fuller view of the value of the two approaches. I've probably answered a third completely different question there, but thank you for the question anyway, Hassan. I found that very useful to think about.
I think that's all the questions from the chat. I wondered, Kayo, if there was time for one more question from me, or are we cutting it too close to?
A quick question, yeah.
Very quick question. I know that you were hesitant to name any specific examples, but I was particularly wondering about whether there was. I was interested in the GIS and 3D modelling. Whether you'd had any of any projects where those were intersecting.
I don't think we've had any that actually implemented both with the same in the same project. Or we've certainly had, because I mean that would be quite a lot of work for a small project like this. We've certainly had some who've done either GIS or 3D modeling and have thought about how they could have implemented the other with it as well. We had a student who was interested in looking at view sheds in contemporary London. Seeing, which classical architecture can you see from various points, in London if you were, walking around, and that was entirely designed as a GIS project, but they did think about how 3D modeling of various artifacts would help with enhancing the view shed questions in there, and vice versa. Some of the 3D modeling projects have thought about putting this in the landscape and then making sure this was a 3D landscape to help show the context of the building in relation to hills and forests and other things around it. So they've often thought about that, and they found that very, very interesting. I don't recall a recent one that's tried to implement both, but I may be forgetting something.
I imagine it's quite a small project in order to do both of those things, but thank you so much.
Thanks, Rihanna. Thanks very much, Gabby, for your presentation. So the next session will be on the 17th of June. We were going to watch Ruth Annert's presentation on Stop, Collaborate and Listen, lessons on interdisciplinary collaboration from the Living with Machines project. So I hope to see you all there. Thanks very much for joining today. Bye-bye.